These are the answers for the Algebra Regents January 2015 short response questions. So when we take a look at question number 25, it says that is the sum of 4.2 and radical 2 rational or irrational? Patrick answered that it would be irrational. State whether he is correct or incorrect and justify your reasoning. So when you type this into the calculator, 4.2 plus radical 2 is this big, long, ugly decimal. You need the dot, dot, dot at the end if you write it out like this and justify your reasoning by showing what the answer really is. So you need the dot, dot, dot at the end, because otherwise you're showing that the decimal stops and you're showing a rational number, not an irrational number. You could also, instead of showing the actual answer, you could just say that 4.2 is a rational number, radical 2 is an irrational number, and a rational plus an irrational is always an irrational. So either way, either saying this thing or saying the actual answer with the dot, dot, dot at the end would be a correct answer, but you have to say that he is correct first as well. In question number 20, oh, by the way, so by saying that he's correct is worth 1 point, and then your explanation is worth 1 point. In question number 26, if there are 180 students in the 9th grade, what percentage of the 9th grade students belong to more than one club? So more than one club could be 2 clubs or 3 or more clubs. So you have to add these two numbers together first. So there's 45 9th graders out of the 180 9th graders. So 45 over 80, top divided by bottom, you get 0.25. Making a decimal into a percent, you would have to move the decimal point over 2 places to be 25%. How would we really score this? If you just have one mistake somewhere, I would say 1 out of 2. If you have more than one mistake somewhere, it would be 0 out of 2. Definitely had to write 25% though, not just leave it as 0.25. In question number 27, if included in the table, which ordered pair, -4, 1 or 1, -4, would result in a relation that is no longer a function? No longer a function means not a function. And explain your answer. So looking at these, I see that I have a -4 already as an x value. By adding another -4 as an x value, that would create this type of graph where you have 2 points directly above each other. When you have 2 points directly above each other, it fails the vertical line test. So that is not a function. Also, you could explain it by saying that a -4 as another x value would make it no longer a function, because you can't have 2 x values that are the same, or you can't have an x value that's being used twice, because that makes it not a function. It's sort of hard to give partial credit on this one. You have to have one of these 2 explanations. In question number 28, be careful. It says subtract this trinomial from this trinomial. If you do it backwards, you'll get all the same numbers, but different signs, right? So if all of your signs are different because you did the first one minus the second one, instead of the second one minus the first one, you only get 1 out of 2 points. So anyway, we're doing the second trinomial minus the first trinomial. Change the minus sign to a plus sign, change all the signs in the second trinomial. So the 5 to a -5, the 2 to a -2, the -11 to a +11, and then add going down. You get -2x squared plus 6x plus 4. Again, if you just had one little mistake, maybe a plus or minus sign somewhere wrong, or one of the numbers wrong, that would be 1 out of 2. If you have more than one mistake, that is 0 out of 2. In question number 29, solve the equation algebraically. So you want to get it set equal to 0. So I would do -7 and -7 first to get it set equal to 0. Now you could check your answer by doing it graphically and look at the zeros or x-intercepts, but this one specifically says solve it algebraically. I wouldn't do reverse FOIL on this one. I wouldn't factor the trinomial. I don't like doing completing the square. I would use the quadratic formula. So if you use the quadratic formula, this is what you get. At the end, you have decimals. So top divided by bottom to change them into decimals, you get 3.5 and -0.5. A lot of times people ask me, should I reject the negative? Only reject the negative when it's a word problem that's dealing with time. This one is not a word problem. It's not dealing with time. So you do keep the negative answer. So you have 3.5 and negative 0.5. Again, if you just had one little mistake somewhere along the way, or maybe you lost your plus or minus, if you just had one mistake, you would get 1 out of 2. More than one mistake is 0 out of 2. Or if you did it graphically, that would be 0 out of 2. In question number 30, graph these two equations, graph this piecewise function on the graph below. So we want the absolute value of x. Remember, to type in the absolute value, you have to do second and then the 0, which is a catalog button, to be the ABS. So second, so y equals the absolute value of x. We only want it from -3 to 1. But remember, you have less than here. If it doesn't have the or equal to, it has to be an open dot. When you have the or equal to, it has to be a closed dot. So a closed dot from 3 to an open dot of -1. So I want to figure out what -3 is, what -2 is, what -1, what 0, and what 1 is for the absolute value of x. Remember, no arrow on the end here because it starts at -3. Then we want to graph this equation. Y equals 4. Remember, hazy vixen, a y equals equation is going to be a horizontal line. X equals is going to be a vertical line going up and down. So if you type in y equals 4, we want to know what it is from 1 through 8. Again, closed dot and closed dot. So we have 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. No arrows on the ends again, because it starts at 1 and ends at 8. Remember, to get those points, after you type it into your y equals, you could just hit second and table to find the coordinates of the points. Again, no arrows anywhere. You have to have an open dot here. Again, if you have one mistake somewhere, that's 1 out of 2. If you have more than one mistake, it would be 0 out of 2. In question number 31, they try and trick you a little bit because it says in type A, it is 3 feet tall and grows at a rate of 15 inches per year. Type B is 4 feet tall, but grows at a rate of 10 inches per year. How they tried to trick you was combining both feet and inches in the same problem. In order to set up an equation, we have to be inches and inches, or you can make it into feet and feet, but these are going to be ugly decimals then. So I would make them all into inches. There are 36 inches and 3 feet, because 3 times 12 is 36. There's 48 inches and 4 feet. 12 times 4 is 48. So for type A, the equation would be starting at 36 inches and it grows 15 inches per year, so plus 15x. For type B, it starts off at 4 feet tall or 48 inches, plus it grows at 10 inches per year. We want to determine algebraically how many will it take to be the same height. The same is equal. We want to know when those two things will be equal to each other. So we want to set up the equation where the two things are equal to each other and then solve. We want all the letters on one side, all the plain numbers on the other side. So I subtracted 36 from both sides. I subtracted 10x from both sides. You could do it in a variety of different ways as well. But in the end, you should get a final answer of x equals 2.4. If you set up the equation, you would at least get 1 point. If you solve the equation wrong, you would not get credit for that, but you would get credit for setting up the equation correctly. Maybe if you set up an equation where you set them equal to each other, but maybe had wrong numbers in your parts of your equation, but you solved it right, you could still get 1 out of 2. In number 32, write an exponential equation for the graph shown below. Now, this one's a little bit tricky. They didn't have these red dots, but you want to see where that line crosses the background grid. So my 3 points on the graph are over to 2 up to 1, over to 4 up to 4, over to 5 up to 8. These are my 3 points that I'm going to type into my stat calc. Now I can see that this is a single curve. That means it's an exponential regression. It's an exponential curve. So I want to type these into my L1 and into my L2, and then do stat calc 0, which is for an exponential regression. That way I come up with this equation, which is what they're looking for at the top. So getting the equation is worth 1 point. This was your A value, this was your B value. And then explaining how you did it, you found the points on the graph and then did an exponential regression. is worth 1 point. In question number 33, now we have a 4-point question. Jacob and Zachary go to the movie theater. They're purchasing refreshments for their friends. Jacob spends a total of $18.25 on 2 bags of popcorn and 3 drinks. Zach spends $27.50 on 4 bags of popcorn and 2 drinks. Write a system of equations that can be used. So 2 bags of popcorn, 2p, plus 3 drinks, 3d, equals $18.25. 4 bags of popcorn, 4p, plus 2 drinks, 2d, equals $27.50. 1 point each there, because it's a 4-point question. Now we want to solve. All right, we want to figure out what d equals and what p equals. So you have these 2 equations. I would do it algebraically by multiplying to create opposites. 2 goes into 4 evenly, so I would try and create opposites with the p's. You create the opposite of 4 by getting -4 up here. To get a -4 here, I have to multiply by -2. Distribute, distribute, distribute. So I have these 2 equations now. Notice that I have my opposites. So now I'm just going to add going down. Those p's cancel out. I get -4d equals -9. Divide by -4, divide by -4. You get that the cost of 1 drink is $2.25. Take that cost of the drink. I could either sub it into here or here for the d's, into my original equations. I chose to sub it into the top equation. I don't know why, I just did. But I chose to sub it into the top equation. So 3 times d, I have 3 times 2.25. And now I'm going to solve that. It just ends up being a 2-step equation. Subtract, divide. You get that the price of popcorn was $5.75. So 4-point question, 1 point for this equation, 1 point for this equation, 1 point for solving for d, 1 point for solving for p. In question number 34, it's they give you this black equation there already. That's a solid line shading above. Notice that I wrote in my points there, all right, where the line crosses the background grid. I just find that helpful sometimes. In letter A, it says, write the inequality represented by the graph. Well, you always have a y equals, but in this case, it's not going to be an equals. It's going to be greater than or equal to, because again, it's a solid line shading above. That's what greater than or equals is. And then it starts off at -3 here. That's the y-intercept of the graph, where the line crosses the y-axis. So it's going to start off at -3. And then the reason why I wrote in the points is because I'm going up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1. You could either write 2 or 2 over 1 in front of the x. That would be worth 1 point. Letter B says, on the same set of axes, graph this equation. Well, in order to graph that equation, we always have to have equations set equal to y equals. So I want to rearrange it by doing -x and -x, divide by 2's. Be careful, there's really a 1 in front of this x, so this becomes -1/2 x plus 2, and its y is less than that. So I would do second and table to find your points. You're going to connect it with a dotted line shading below, right? Dotted line shading below. That would be worth 1 point if you graphed it correctly. Make sure you have arrows on the ends of your lines. Then in part C, the 2 inequalities graphed on the set of axes form a system. Oscar thinks that the point 2, 1 is in the solution set. Determine and state with whether you agree and explain why. So 2, 1 is over to 2, up to 1. It's this point right here in the purple. Well, that is, you would have to say that you disagree. All right, that's worth 1 point. And then your explanation is worth 1 point. Why it's not a solution is because it's not in the double shaded area. Points on the dotted line are not included in the solution set. All right, points on the dotted line. It has to be on a solid line if it's in the solution set, or in the double shaded area, like over in here. In question number 35, the nutritionist collected information about 2 different kinds, or about calories and milligrams of sodium in hot dogs. L1, L2. You want to write the correlation coefficient or your R value for the line of best fit. Because it says line, you want to do a linear regression, stat calc number 4. When you do that, it does say round to the nearest hundredth. When you type these into your L1 and L2, always double check your data to make sure that you typed it in correctly. you get R equals 0.94 for your R value or correlation coefficient rounded to the nearest hundredth. That is worth 2 points. And then explain what the correlation coefficient suggests in the context of the problem. Whenever it says in the context of the problem, that means your actual real life. All right. So you can't just say that it's a strong positive correlation. You can't just say that. You have to say that as the calories increase, the sodium also increases. All right. As the one increases, the other increases. You have to say that. You can't just say that it's a strong correlation because it says in the context of the problem. In question number 36, the beginning part of this is fine, but the bottom part is a little bit tricky because it asks for something in vertex form. We don't often use vertex form. In part A, it says, given the function, this, state whether the vertex represents a max or a min and explain your answer. There's nothing wrong with showing the graph here. That's what I would do. It is a max that gives you 1 point. And explain your answer. The graph of the parabola opens downward, and the highest point is 4,25. So you could just show this picture here. That is good for explaining your answer, that it's a maximum of 425. You don't have to necessarily say 425. It's just that it is the maximum. And show the picture. Letter B. So that's worth 2 points. In letter B, rewrite f of x in vertex form by completing the square. It says by completing the square, so you have to use completing the square. So you have this equation, which is our original equation. The tricky part of this one, and I highly doubt that most people would get this right, when you do completing the square, you can't start off with a negative here. So I have to divide each and every term by a -1 and a -1 before I even start. That's really, really tricky there. So now I have this. I would have to get rid of my C value. So add 9 to both sides, take half of my B value and square it. Half of -8 is -4. -4 squared is +16. So I would add 16 to both sides. Here's my trinomial. And then I get x minus 4 squared equals 25. I now, to put it into vertex form, can't have it equal to 25. I need it equal to 0. So I'd have to subtract 25 from both sides. Here's another tricky part of this one. Because the parabola opens downward, that negative sign that I took out at the very beginning, I have to stick it back in. I have to stick it back in and put it out front to be the correct answer of negative and then parentheses x minus 4 squared minus 25. Very, very hard bottom of the question. Everybody should be able to get this top question, but this bottom question is very, very difficult. 2 points for the top, 2 points for the bottom. And then in question number 37, you have a square. Notice that it says a square. Here's my square. All 4 sides of the square are the same size. It's being adjusted so that one side is doubled in length. So that becomes 2x. When you double something, you multiply it by 2. And the other side is decreased by 3. So I'm going to subtract 3 from the other 2 sides. That's now going to form a rectangle. That rectangle is 25% more than the original square. Write an equation that can be used to determine the length of the side of the rectangle, a side of the original square garden. This is very, very difficult here to set up this equation correctly. These 2 sides multiplied together give you your area, because the area is length times width, or you could say base times height. So of the new rectangle, you have to multiply both of those sides together. Here's the tricky part. In order to be 25% bigger than it, you have to multiply by 1.25 x squared. It's x squared because it's 25% more than the original. So the original is x times x, which is x squared. To be 25% more, you'd have to multiply by 1.25. The 1 gives you your whole thing that you started off with, plus the 25% or 0.25 more. So setting up the equation is worth 1 point. Explain how your equation models the situation. Well, you have to explain what each part of that is. The 2x is the length of that's doubled. The x minus 3 is the length decreased by 3. The multiplying the 2 by it is the length times the width to find the area of the new rectangle. The x is the original side. multiply the x by the x to find the original square, and then times 1.25 for 25% more. This explanation is worth 2 points. Actually, this is worth 2 points, yes. Determine the area in square meters of the new rectangular garden. So now you have to solve this equation. So I would subtract 1.25 x squared from both sides. That gets it set equal to 0. I would factor out the greatest common factor here, set both sides equal to 0 and solve. So you end up with 0 and 8. You can't have a side of 0. So you're going to reject the 8, or you're going to reject the 0, and it's just going to be the 8 is the original side. Sub in the 8 back in, sub the 8 back in, and you have 2 times 8 times, in parentheses, 8 minus 3, because you're multiplying the two things together, and you get 80 as the new area. Here is your conversion chart. Hopefully you did well.